Welcome to the third video installment of Tales from My Spinner Rack. I'm Gary Sassman, the former Director of Programming and Print and Publications for Comic-Con International San Diego. In Episode 3, I'm going to take you into the weird, wild, and wonky world of two of DC Comics' best-selling comic book series of the 1950s and 60s, Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen, and Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane. This is a recreation of my Comic-Con 2023 panel presentation, Jimmy and Lois, Still Crazy After All These Years. By the way, this is a long one, over 35 minutes, so grab your favorite beverage and some snacks and sit back and relax. If you need a bathroom break, please raise your hand or hit pause. I'm good either way. For the beginning of this tale, we have to go back 85 years to 1938. Two young men from Cleveland, writer Jerry Siegel and artist Joe Shuster, just barely out of their teens, had shopped around their new creation, Superman, to newspaper syndicates and comic book publishers for years, racking up an impressive stack of about 15 rejections. While working as an editor for the McClure Syndicate, Sheldon Mayer came across their strip submission. He was, as he put it, crazy about it, and sang its praises to his boss, M.C. Gaines, who basically created the comic book format in 1933. Gaines took it to publisher Harry Donenfeld at National, who was looking for material for their new title, Action Comics. The rest, as they say, ... Superman was an immediate sensation, and Lois Lane was there from the beginning. The beautiful, raven-haired reporter for the Daily Star, I'm pretty sure Rupert Murdoch owned that paper back then, was smart and intrepid and always got her story, but never quite figured out that Superman was really Clark Kent. She appeared in the very first Superman story in the June issue of Action Comics #1, which went on sale on April 18, 1938. The Daily Star eventually became the Daily Planet. Cub reporter Jimmy Olsen more than likely made his first appearance in Action Comics #6, cover dated November 1938, as an unnamed office boy. At that point, they still hadn't figured out that Superman should be on every Action Comics cover. Jimmy was first mentioned by name on the Adventures of Superman radio show on April 15, 1940. He first appeared as Jimmy in the comic books in Superman #13, but didn't gain a last name until World's Finest #15, the fall 1944 issue. While Lois Lane made the jump to the big screen in 1941 in the Max Fleischer Superman cartoon series from Paramount Pictures, Jimmy did not. His movie debut came in the Superman serial produced by Columbia Pictures in 1948, and its sequel, Atom Man vs. Superman, in 1950. Jimmy was played by former Little Rascals cast member Tommy Bond. Lois Lane was in both serials too, played by Noel Neill. Superman and Clark Kent were played by Kirk Alyn. But it was in 1952 that Jimmy Olsen really came into his own as part of the ensemble of the Adventures of Superman TV series. Syndicated to numerous stations across the country, new episodes were created from 1952 through 1958. It starred George Reeves as Superman and Clark Kent, Noel Neill as Lois Lane following a first season with actress Phyllis Coates in the role, Jack Larson as Jimmy Olsen, and John Hamilton as editor Perry White. Jimmy and Lois became bona fide TV stars. Interest in superhero comics had waned after World War II. In fact, pretty much the only regularly published superhero comics left were at DC. Superman and Batman both starred in multiple titles, and Wonder Woman still had her own book, but Sensation Comics, where she first appeared, went away in 1952. And while all that was about to change when editor Julius Schwartz revived Golden Age of the Flash in Showcase #4 in 1956, that was still a few years away. Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen, became the first new superhero book to be launched by DC in the 1950s. The first bi-monthly issue hit the newsstands in July 1954, cover dated September-October. It's fair to say that DC's creation of a new Jimmy Olsen comic book series was based largely on the appeal of Jack Larson, on the Adventures of Superman TV show. And Jimmy was a hit in comic book form, even though the title leaned more towards zany humor than serious superhero fare. Jimmy got into outrageous situations and often needed Superman's help to get out of them. Good thing Superman so wisely gave Jimmy a special supersonic signal watch to use to contact him when the going got rough. It's interesting to note that Lois never got a similar Save Me Superman piece of jewelry. I'm just saying. Whitney Ellsworth was the editor of the series in the beginning, and he was also a producer and story editor of the Adventures of Superman TV series. Mort Weisinger took over as editor around issue number 18, cover dated February 1958, with Ellsworth continuing as executive editor. But it was under Weisinger where things started to get really wonky for Jimmy. Mort controlled the Superman family books with an iron fist from 1958 until he retired in 1970. He brought a lot of different characters and concepts to the books, including Supergirl, Krypto the Superdog, Streaky the Super Cat, Comet the Super Horse, Beppo the Super Monkey, the Legion of Superheroes, the Bottle City of Kandor, and the Phantom Zone villains, evildoers from Krypton imprisoned in another dimension for their crimes. In fact, by the time Mort was done, there were probably more Kryptonians alive than dead. He also introduced numerous types of kryptonite, the deadly rock left over from Krypton that can kill Superman. Green, red, blue, white, gold, silver, and the little-known Neapolitan, all with very specific effects on all those superpowered Kryptonians. And just in case you're wondering, Neapolitan kryptonite made Superman scream for ice cream for 24 hours, and it was really annoying. But I think Weisinger's biggest innovation was the imaginary story, a story that may, or may not, actually happen one day to the Superman family. You know, like the death of Superman or Lois and Superman getting married. But as Alan Moore pointed out in what I'm guessing was a rare moment of non-drug influenced clarity, when it came to comic book stories, aren't they all imaginary? Yes, Alan. Yes, they are. Jimmy's series had numerous writers, including Otto Binder, who got the book off to its start and did 3 stories per issue for about the first 40 issues. But the real workhorse of Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen, was artist Curt Swan, who contributed 108 consecutive covers to the title, plus numerous stories. Considered the definitive Superman artist from the late 1950s into the mid-1980s, Swan penciled Superman, Action Comics, World's Finest, and Jimmy Olsen, plus numerous Lois Lane covers and the occasional story for that title. The story concepts in Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen can be neatly placed into almost Jeopardy-like game show categories. Let's start with a favorite of mine. Superman is a dick. There was the time Superman adopted Jimmy, but didn't like the robe he got for Father's Day. Or the time Superman had Jimmy committed to an asylum to keep him from revealing his secret identity. Or when he forced Jimmy to live in a rat-infested apartment, just for being a wise guy, see? Or when he withheld water from both Jimmy and Aquaman because, survival of the fittest. But Jimmy could be a dick too. Like that time he married Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane. Or when he murdered Clark Kent and then had to murder Superman too. And when he voted Superman off of King Olsen's private island with deadly kryptonite. Or every middle-aged comic book editor's 1960s nightmare, hippie Olsen. Superman's a freak-out, man! And let's not forget Jimmy pretending to die to get Superman to reveal he's Clark Kent. Twice. But Jimmy was also a sensitive artiste. Yeah. He started the Beatles craze in 1000 BC as the red-headed Beatle, but he was bouncier than the Beatles and more electrifying than Elvis when he and Superman strutted their big hit, the Krypton Crawl. That's crazy, Daddy-O. And then, of course, there was Super Jimmy, with superpowers far beyond those of mortal pals. He was both Superman's kid brother, don't ask how, or why he's a summer blonde on the cover, and the super lad of space on some far-off futuristic planet. His most famous superpowered role was as Elastic Lad, a super stretchy hero with none of the charm of Plastic Man or the intellect of Mr. Fantastic. But he was evidently very popular with the ladies of the Legion of Superheroes. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Speaking of the Legion, somehow Jimmy got the powers and costume of Colossal Boy and threatened to kill his girlfriend, Lucy Lane. Great Krypton, he's gone berserk. And finally, in a later issue of Jimmy Olsen, he's Ultra Olsen, which is either a superhero or a roll-on deodorant. Men, stay fresh all day with Ultra Olsen. One of the most popular aspects of Jimmy's comic series was his amazing transformations, the most famous of which was when he turned into the giant Turtle Man and wreaked havoc on Metropolis's bridges. He also took a turn as a sideshow performer as the human porcupine. Ouch! What a prick. Jimmy's transformations all teamed up and came back to haunt him in the story World of Doomed Olsens in issue number 72, and The Planet of 1000 Olsens in number 105, proving once again that editor Mort Weisinger never let a story be told just once. Here's one of my favorite issues of Jimmy Olsen, number 53, when he teamed up with Superman to be the dynamic duo of Kandor, Nightwing and Flamebird. Note the cover mistake where Jimmy calls Superman Nightbird instead of Nightwing. I'm pretty sure he was just thinking of his favorite Stevie Nicks song. But this is my all-time favorite issue of Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen, number 44, the April 1960 issue, featuring the terrifying story of the Wolfman of Metropolis, which incidentally has a purple cover, a very important side note that we'll get to in a bit. This story was written by Otto Binder, with pencils by Kurt Swan and inks by Stan Kay. Let's take a closer look. It starts with Jimmy making out with his main squeeze, Lucy Lane, Lois's little sister, and thinking, because thought balloons were big in comics back then, I want more of this. Evidently, Jimmy ain't too proud to beg, but Lucy accuses him of being a wolf and sends him on his way. Superman appears the next day with an ancient box full of old magic potions he found in a rediscovered crypt, and Jimmy promptly guzzles down the bottle of Ye Wolfman potion to wash down his lunchtime sandwich. Jimmy has few boundaries and evidently has difficulty reading. When the moon rises that night, he turns into a wolfman. Wow, I didn't see that coming, did you? Conveniently, it's Halloween, and when he goes to pick up Lucy for a costume party, she thinks he's so clever dressed as a wolf, since she's dressed as Little Red Riding Hood in a costume he bought specially for her. Jimmy learns that the only way he can reverse the potion is to be kissed by a beautiful maiden, but Lucy won't play along as long as he's wearing that horrible mask. Jimmy turns back to normal the next morning and is sent by Perry White to interview a movie producer, but he turns back into the Wolfman at night. When he gets to the studio, he's mistaken for an actor in costume and dragged into the filming of the new movie, The 100 Horrors. His makeup is so convincing he's offered a role in the film, but he turns it down, because that ain't makeup. The next day, normal again, or as normal as Jimmy gets, he goes to the bank and withdraws all of his savings so he can pay some young, beautiful maiden to kiss him to break the spell. Yes, he resorts to prostitution. That gets him a slap in the face in a dark park by a comely redhead. Jimmy uses his signal watch to summon Superman and tells him all about his dilemma. Super Pimp vows to try to get the antidote for him. Jimmy is concerned his wolfish traits are taking over. The next day, he takes out the Daily Planet's flying newsroom, a big red helicopter, which Jimmy evidently knows how to fly, but not well enough to check the gas gauge. He turns into the Wolfman yet again at moonrise, while running out of gas in the copter and conveniently landing on the rooftop of the Lane sisters' apartment. But a nearby billboard promoting a movie called The Boy Who Cried Wolf convinces Lucy, Lois, and their nosy neighbors that Jimmy is just doing a side gig to promote the movie dressed as a wolf. This was in the days before Uber Eats and DoorDash. Jimmy tells Superman he's going off to live in the jungle before his wolfish instincts take over, and his old faithful pal tells him he has a pretty girl all set up to kiss Jimmy in his apartment, with the lights out, of course, so she won't be grossed out by Jimmy's appearance. A silhouetted kiss is given, and Jimmy happily turns back into his old self, while Superman escorts his young cousin, Supergirl, back to the orphanage in Midvale, where she lives as Linda Lee. Yes, Superman pimps out his underage cousin to give Jimmy a kiss. Later, while making out with Lucy on a park bench, Jimmy pines for the mysterious Miss X who saved him with a kiss. The end. Comics are great, right? The whole Wolfman thing was a very canny move on editor Mort Weisinger's part, or maybe writer Otto Binder if this was an original pitch of his. It came on the heels of the release of the Universal Monster movies to local TV stations in the late 1950s, and soon after the birth of Forrest J. Ackerman's Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, published by James Warren, which was burning up the newsstands. Monsters were big. In addition to being one of his more popular transformations, Jimmy the Wolfman was back, howling at the moon, just 1 year later, in the April 1961 issue, number 52, and once again with a purple cover, the significance of which we're going to get to. Calm down. Through the 1960s, both Jimmy Olsen and Lois Lane were amongst DC's top sellers, averaging over 500,000 copies per issue, and often landing in the top 5 selling comics. They even earned their own annuals. At some point that faded, but Jimmy found himself with one more moment of glory. When Jack Kirby left Marvel in 1969 for DC, he reportedly told editorial director Carmine Infantino that he wanted to take over the company's worst-selling superhero book. That book was Jimmy Olsen, so Kirby introduced his fourth world concepts into Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen, starting in issue number 133. Kirby lasted to issue number 148 on the series, minus an 80-page giant or two, and for one brief shining moment, Jimmy was a fan favorite once again, leading Kirby's New Gods initiative at DC. But it didn't last. DC prematurely canceled most of the Kirby titles. And Jimmy after Kirby was pretty bad. Eventually DC took Jimmy Olsen, Lois Lane, and Supergirl and combined them into a 100-page super spectacular book called Superman Family, which took over the Jimmy Olsen numbering with issue number 164. It lasted, in various page counts and prices, until issue number 211, cover dated September 1982. And that brings us to Lois, or more correctly, Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane, portrayed on the Adventures of Superman TV series by the winsome Noel Neill. DC was a little more cautious in launching Lois in her own ongoing series. She first appeared in 2 back-to-back issues of Showcase, their tryout title, in 1957, issues number 9 and 10, cover dated August and October respectively. They must have been successful because in early 1958, Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane was launched in her own book. Issue number 1 was cover dated for April. You know, the one with Lois as a witch on the cover. Hee hee. 1958 marked the final year for new episodes of the Adventures of Superman TV series. Star George Reeves would die under mysterious circumstances the following year, before another season's filming started up. You can put me down now, George. And while Lois Lane had a lot of similarities with Jimmy Olsen, like their love of running half naked through the jungle, the wind in their hair, and competitive sports like them wrestling shows on the TV, and their mutual ability to do hard time. By the way, you look great in stripes, Lois. Lois sure spent an awful lot of time in her comic book series worrying about marrying Superman. And that tempestuous redhead, Lana Lang, Superboy's girlfriend all grown up, played a big role in the book, also vying for Superman's attention. Lois and Lana were kind of like the Betty and Veronica of DC. Numerous writers penned Lois Lane stories, including Otto Binder, E. Nelson Bridwell, Bill Finger, Edmund Hamilton, and Robert Kanigher. But once again, there's one artist most associated with the title from the late 1950s until the early 1970s, Kurt Schaffenberger, whose clean, crisp style and skill in drawing beautiful women made Lois Lane a hit. Schaffenberger was the primary artist on the title from issue number 1 through number 82. Like Jimmy, a trip through Lois Lane covers reveals the true nature of the title. So here we go. Lois's covers, too, can be neatly categorized, just like Jimmy's. Let's start with Lois is angry. It's Splitsville for Lois and Superman, so much so that Lois destroys this mint-condition comic book. That's one book that's never going off to be slabbed at CGC. Lois takes out her super frustrations on a poor, defenseless Superman dummy. Definite anger issues, but kinda kinky with that whip. There was a time when Lois just wanted to kill her, kill her, kill her, when Kryptonian Kor-Lar gave Lois superpowers. Remember, you can't always get what you want, Ms. Lane. And Lois threw all her special Superman souvenirs at the Man of Steel in a moment of extreme self-reflection. Take a deep breath, Lois. Just like Jimmy, Lois had some transformations of her own, like when she became Cinderella and realized going to the ball and meeting Prince Charming is bunk. But when she got tired of waiting for Superman and married Prince Ali and got her weight in gems. Get lost, Superman. This is Lois's I Dream a Genie moment. Lois as the Queen decided to behead Superman, and as the Lady Dictator, to have him act as a one-man firing squad. In other words, Lois ruled. Love and marriage were always on Lois's mind, but even she knew how to play hard to get. Keep your super gifts, Superman. This woman can't be bought. Or maybe she can, at least in an imaginary story. Here's the blissful couple with their two super twins on an idyllic picnic. Pretty sure those two super kids made a super mess, and Lois was stuck cleaning it up, those scamps. But sometimes love goes sour, especially when it comes to Superman's old girlfriends, whose photos he keeps locked up in a safe. Don't ask why. Maybe it's time to move on, Lois. Maybe there's another superhero out there who can care for you. And hey, he's rich, too. I'm Batman. And if you're going to look for love elsewhere, well, Luthor might make a good dad. And if the dark side is your thing, who else springs to mind? Could it be Satan? Well, isn't that special? Hey, I'm only 30 or so years behind the times with cultural references, okay? But just like Jimmy Olsen, Lois unfortunately discovered Superman is a dick. Like the time when he introduced her to his secret wife and family. Or when he had his new girlfriend, Wonder Woman, beat up Lois because he's going to marry her instead. Great show, Wonder Woman. Of course, there's that time that he killed Lois. That was a pretty dickish move. But here's the height of super dictum. Superman proclaiming, "Who wants a wife so stupid she doesn't realize I'm Superman when I take off my Clark Kent glasses?" Man, what a dick. I have a couple of Lois Lane favorites too. This first one, number 92. I can't even form sentences that do this cover justice. I mean, is she now Lois Lane because aren't all centaurs male? Let's just say it was beautifully drawn by Kurt Swan and Neil Adams and leave it at that. And then, of course, there's this story of love and devotion, of Lois finally meeting someone, well, something, who is truly, madly, deeply devoted to her. For your consideration, I present Superman's Girlfriend, Lois Lane, number 54, from January 1965, The Monster That Loved Lois Lane. This story was written by Edmund Hamilton, with pencils and inks by Kurt Schaffenberger. Lois is given a crap assignment from editor Perry White to go see physicist Dr. Elder about his scientific breakthrough. Elder's research has created a machine that can open a door to another dimension. Lois thinks, But Dr. Elder doesn't look like a crackpot. The good doctor demonstrates his device, which opens a portal to the other dimension, and a giant creature, "Eek! It's a monster!" Lois proclaims, comes through. The monster heads towards Lois, and a tentacle grasps the paralyzed Lois, whose thoughts immediately turn to her beloved Superman. I was going to make a joke here about this being the origin of tentacle porn in the DC universe, but, this video is rated PG, and maybe Aquaman already beat Lois to it. The creature gently puts Lois down and, in the grand tradition of courtship, introduces himself. He's Herco, and like Groot, he seems able to only mention his name when he speaks. Herco tries his best to woo Lois, destroying a nearby car he thought was threatening her, uprooting a tree to give to Lois when he sees a young couple with flowers, and kidnapping a leopard from a zoo to give to her as a pet. You know, the standard alien from another dimension wooing protocols. At the behest of the local police, Lois leads Herco away to a safe space, bravely offering her hand in platonic friendship. Lois decides Herco is really likable in a way, as she leads him away from danger. They pass a jewelry store with an engagement ring display in the window, and Herco grabs a nearby light pole and bends it into a giant ring for Lois, thus proclaiming his everlasting love. Aww. Jimmy Olsen arrives on the scene and uses his supersonic signal watch, which again, let me remind you, Lois does not have one of these, to contact Superman, who gets there in a flash to battle the hulking monster. Not much of a safe place after all, is it? Superman and Dr. Elder decide to lure the monster back to the lab to send him back to his dimension. Superman tells Lois that the only way to get Herco to go back is for her to cross through the portal first, so the creature will follow. Lois takes this to mean that Superman is willing to let her leave Earth forever to get this monster back where he belongs. Lois needs to work on her self-esteem. But at the very last minute, Superman uses his super breath to inhale quickly, thus sucking Lois back to Earth while the portal closes. Lois sheds a tear for poor, devoted Herco, who is left alone in his dimension. He was the dearest monster, Lois muses. I feel he'll wait and wait for me. Maybe someday I'll have the dimension door opened and at least let him see me again. You're such a tease, Lois. But it's always good to have a backup plan if this whole marrying Superman thing doesn't work out for you. The end. The prevailing wisdom at DC Comics in the 1950s and 60s was that the cover sold the book. Supposedly, DC Comics editorial director Erwin Donenfeld, who was also the son of the co-owner of the company, Harry Donenfeld, remember what we said in our last video, nepotism is nice, had a list of 7 things he felt sold covers. That list included gorillas, dinosaurs, motorcycles, a purple background, a city in flames, the hero crying, a direct question to the reader. So let's play along with Jimmy and Lois covers. Gorillas? Jimmy? Check. Lois? Nope. Lois can only muster a scrawny chimpanzee. Dinosaurs? Sadly, I couldn't find any dinosaurs on either Jimmy Olsen or Lois Lane covers. I think they missed out. Motorcycles? Jimmy? Check. Lois? Check. And both looking pretty badass, if I may say. A purple background? See, I told you these purple backgrounds were important. Jimmy? Check. Lois? Check. Love those purple backgrounds. A city in flames? I'm calling this one as a double check. Jimmy and Lois both become human bombs and destroy cities. Close enough. The hero crying? Jimmy? Check. Oh, man. Man up, Superman. Jeez. Lois? Check. But yet another secret wife and family for Superman, that cad. A direct question to the reader? Jimmy? Check. How can Jimmy cut Superman's indestructible hair of steel? Lois? Check. Can you guess who is the girl who refused to marry Superman? And let's go to the scoreboard. Oh, Jimmy squeaks out a win with 6 out of 7, while Lois is close behind with only 5. Tough break, Lois. And speaking of covers, notice anything different about these two? They were on newsstands at the same time in late 1965 and early 1966. Yes, that amazingly graphic checkerboard across the top. It really just pops off the cover, right? Well, no. That design was called Go-Go Checks, and it was the brainchild of DC Comics editorial director Erwin Donenfeld. Yes, him again. As he explained to Comic Book Artist magazine, I wanted to have something that showed DC Comics were different than anything else. So wherever these magazines were displayed, you could always see a DC comic from way back. It was to distinguish us from anybody else. All DC Comics from early 1966 through mid-1967 sported Go-Go checks. They appeared on 535 different covers, everything from Action Comics, where it appeared the most, 20 times, to Young Love. The Batman TV show certainly caused an uptick in sales for any cover with anything Batman on it. Hello, Jimmy Olsen as Batman Superman, and Lois Lane versus Catwoman, but Go-Go checks didn't help much. Let us pause and have a moment of silence for Super Pussycat, formerly Superman, gone but never forgotten. DC's overall sales continue to falter, even with this new gimmick, which was an idea regarded as hip, happening, and now, as only a middle-aged, suit-wearing publishing exec who thought his comic books were bought exclusively by 8 to 14-year-old boys could imagine, circa 1966. As this hipster limerick explained in a house ad appearing in DC Comics. Said a cat suffocating in Squaresville, I have moved to the wide open Airsville, 'cause those mags from DC set me off on a spree that are strictly from None Can Comparesville. Like, that's strictly from Poetryville, Daddy-O. Donenfeld's replacement, artist Carmine Infantino, who went on to become DC Comics publishers, said, It was the stupidest idea we ever had, because the books were bad in those days, and that just showed people right off what not to buy. I actually don't know that Carmine spoke like that, so I apologize. But I respectfully disagree, Carmine, and I'm patiently waiting to see the Go-Go Checks Omnibus series. It should only take about 15 volumes or so. On a personal note, I had the honor of giving Comic-Con's Inkpot Award to both Jack Larson and Noel Neill. Noel got hers in 2008, while Jack got his in 2013. Noel sent me Christmas cards each year until her death in 2016, and yes, they always said Noel on the front. Jack died in 2015. His appearance at Comic-Con was part of a big 75th anniversary Superman panel in 2013 and included comics creators Dan Jurgens, Jim Lee, Paul Levitz, and Grant Morrison, screenwriter David S. Goyer, and actors Tim Daly and Henry Cavill. You know, when Warner Brothers actually wanted Henry Cavill to be Superman. So there you have it. About a decade and a half of a very different kind of superhero book. One which now seems a bit old-fashioned and corny, and kind of quaint. Pretty much the only way to read these comics is to search for the original issues. The annuals and 80-page giants give you more bang for your buck. There are no Jimmy Olsen or Lois Lane omnibus collections. There were 4 different Showcase Presents Superman Family collections, the phone book-sized black and white reprints of about 10 to 15 years ago, which reprinted Jimmy Olsen 1 to 53 and Lois Lane 1 to 26. Probably the best Jimmy Olsen reprint book is The Amazing Transformations of Jimmy Olsen. It was published in 2007, and it's long out of print, but you can still find it. It has a great Brian Bolland cover and features a greatest hits compilation of some of Jimmy's best transformations. It's definitely worth seeking out. Besides some recent maxi-series action from the likes of Matt Fraction and Steve Lieber on Jimmy Olsen, and Greg Rucka and Mike Perkins on Lois Lane, these days you have to get your Jimmy and Lois fixes from just the current Superman titles. That Fraction Lieber series does capture the wonkiness of the Silver Age Jimmy Olsen era, though. Looking back at the classic era of these characters, I'm sure we can all agree Jimmy and Lois are still crazy after all these years, or at least their comic books are. The end. Please like, comment, and subscribe here on YouTube, and turn on notifications to find out when I post new videos. If you're watching this, you're already here, so come on, show a little love. Check out my other episodes of Tales from My Spinner Rack featuring And Lo, There Shall Be a Spinner Rack, which includes my secret origin and how both my spinner rack posts and my love of comic books came to be, and the recreation of my WonderCon 2023 panel featuring one of the lowest bat points in the history of Batman, when Batman becomes Batbaby. You can follow me on Instagram at Tales from My Spinner Rack. It's one ridiculously long word, but it's fun if you say it super fast. Or if you want to stalk me personally on Instagram, you can follow me at GG92118. Please let me know you visited by leaving likes and comments, but just be nice, okay? My ego bruises easily. Most importantly, visit my blog at www.innocent-bystander.com to read all my Tales from My Spinner Rack posts. There's over 30 of them now, including posts with all the books you see here and more, with fascinating info about 1960s comic books and tons of scanned images featuring covers, interior pages, and even original art. I promise you'll find these to be informative, fun, and warmly nostalgic. That's www.innocent-bystander.com, where I also post book and streaming reviews, travel photos, and lots of other glimpses into my personal life. Now, doesn't that sound exciting? Thanks for watching. Good night.